The storm came fast across the Wyoming plains, rolling in like a dark wall that swallowed the horizon. Lightning flashed through the purple clouds, turning the dusty land white for a heartbeat before dropping it back into shadow. The wind carried the smell of rain and danger. Horses across the valley lifted their heads, ears twitching uneasy. Caleb Turner felt a change before he even saw the storm. He stood outside his barn, one hand resting on the wooden door, the other gripping the rope tied to his nervous buckskin mare. The sky rumbled like an angry beast. Caleb had lived on the frontier long enough to know this storm was different, stronger, meaner, the kind that tore roofs off barns and turned creek beds into roaring rivers. "Easy, girl," Caleb murmured. "We'll get you inside before the sky tries to kill us both." He pulled the mare toward the barn, boots thudding on the dry ground just as the first drop of rain splattered against his hat brim. Another followed, then a dozen. In seconds, the sky split open and rain poured down in thick, heavy sheets. Caleb shoved the barn door open and dragged the mare inside. The thunder cracked so loud it felt like the ground jumped under his feet. Caleb secured the mare and checked the stalls, making sure nothing loose could fly around when the wind hit. His ranch was simple. Just him, his horses, a few cattle, and the memories of a life he used to share with people he'd lost. Living alone had become a habit, easier than facing the world outside his quiet land. He was about to close the barn door when he heard it. A faint sound carried on the storm's roar. A voice. Or maybe three. Caleb froze, gripping the edge of the barn door as another flash of lightning lit the yard. The rain blurred everything, but he could make out three shapes moving fast across the mud, stumbling, fighting against the wind. Women. The storm shoved them sideways, nearly knocking one to her knees. Caleb didn't think. He yanked the barn door open wide. "Get inside," he shouted. They ran for it, skirts soaked, hair plastered to their faces. As soon as they crossed the threshold, Caleb slammed the barn door shut. The wind hit it immediately, rattling the wood so hard it shivered. The three women stood dripping on his barn floor, water pooling below their skirts. All of them shivered. All of them looked like they'd been running for miles. But it was their faces that caught Caleb's attention. Fear, exhaustion, and something else. Something sharp and watchful. Have you ever opened a door, not knowing it would change your life forever? Have you ever looked at someone running and known they weren't just fleeing weather, but something far more dangerous? The eldest woman stepped forward first. She looked to be around 28, with long dark hair slick with rain. Her eyes were fierce and alert, scanning the barn like she expected trouble to step out of the shadows. "Thank you," she said, breathless. "We had nowhere else to go." The second woman moved beside her. Auburn hair, blue eyes, younger, maybe 24. She had a cut on her cheek and dirt smeared on her dress. Her gaze locked on Caleb with a mixture of suspicion and challenge. The third woman stayed a step behind the others. She seemed barely 20, pale, fragile-looking. Her blonde hair clung to her thin face, and she shook like the cold had sunk into her bones. Caleb raised both hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "You're safe from the storm in here," he said. "Name's Caleb Turner. This is my ranch." The eldest straightened, protective even through her shaking. "I'm Eleanor," she said. She gestured toward the auburn-haired sister. "This is Joe." Then to the youngest. "And this is Lily." All three names were said too quickly, too carefully. Fake, Caleb thought. But folks running from trouble sometimes needed false names to survive. He didn't judge them for it. "You three traveling alone in a storm like this?" he asked. Joe lifted her chin. "We didn't have a choice." Caleb didn't push. He'd seen desperation before. It had a look of its own. He grabbed an old blanket from the wall and walked it over, laying it across Lily's shoulders. She flinched at first, then wrapped it tight around herself, nodding a silent thank you. "You can stay here until the storm passes," Caleb said. "It'll blow hard for a few hours." Joe raised an eyebrow at him. The challenge in her eyes was unmistakable. "Think you can handle all three of us?" she asked, her voice rough from cold, but carrying an edge Caleb couldn't quite read. Eleanor shot her a warning look, but Joe didn't back down. Caleb held her gaze calmly. "I reckon I can manage," he said. The wind slammed the barn again, hard enough to shake the rafters. Lily jumped and pressed close to her sisters. Caleb noticed the bruises, faint but real, on Eleanor's forearms. He noticed the way Joe kept glancing at the barn door like she expected it to burst open. And he noticed Lily's terrified eyes, wide and glassy, like she hadn't slept in days. Something was wrong. Something worse than the storm. "We'll be out of your way by morning," Eleanor said quickly. "No rush," Caleb replied. "Storm this strong. It's dangerous to be out there. It's dangerous for us to stay still too long," Joe muttered under her breath. Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew that tone. He knew what fear disguised as anger sounded like. He'd heard it in himself once. "Whatever trouble you're running from," he said quietly, "you don't have to face it tonight." For the first time since they stepped inside, Eleanor's hard expression softened, just a little. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb nodded and began checking the barn doors again. The storm was no small thing, but as he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling settling heavy in his chest. These three women weren't just lost travelers. Someone was hunting them. And if that someone found their way to Caleb's ranch, everything in his quiet world was about to change. The storm rolled on through the night, pounding the land until the earth turned to mud, and the barn roof shook with every gust. Caleb worked in silence beside the sisters, checking that nothing inside could fall or cause harm. Every time thunder cracked, Lily jumped, clutching the blanket tighter around herself. "You three must be freezing," Caleb said. "There's a potbelly stove in the tack room. I'll get a fire started." Joe stepped in front of him before he could move. "Fast. Too fast." "No," she said, voice sharp. "We're fine here." Eleanor touched her sister's arm in warning, but Joe didn't back down. Caleb raised his hands calmly. "You're safe," he said. "If I wanted trouble, I wouldn't have opened the door." Joe held his stare for several tense seconds before she stepped aside, jaw tight. Caleb walked to the tack room, lit a fire, and stepped back to give them space to warm up. The barn glowed soft and orange as the fire grew. Eleanor led Lily to the heat first, rubbing her arms gently. "You're shaking," she whispered. "I'm trying," Lily murmured, fighting tears. "I'm trying so hard." Caleb pretended not to hear, but his stomach tightened. Whatever they'd been through had carved fear into the smallest sister, so deeply it showed in the way she breathed. Joe, meanwhile, paced like a caged animal. Caleb cleaned tools, refilled water buckets, checked the horses, anything to keep his eyes busy and give them privacy. But he couldn't ignore the strange tension humming in the barn. Finally, he spoke softly. "Whoever hurt you three, is he close by?" Eleanor froze. Joe stopped pacing instantly. Lily's shoulders went stiff. For a moment, none of them answered. Then Eleanor stepped closer, the firelight catching her face. There was exhaustion there, and a grief that made Caleb's chest ache. "We're not ready to talk about it," she said carefully. "But you're right. Someone is following us." A gust rattled the barn walls. Caleb didn't flinch, but his eyes sharpened. "He after all three of you?" Joe laughed once, humorless and hard. "Oh, he wants all of us. In different ways." "Joe," Eleanor warned. "No," Joe snapped. "He deserves to be named." She turned to Caleb. "His name is Richard Hale. He owns land, businesses, lawmen. He acts like he owns people too, including us." Caleb's jaw tightened until it hurt. "He kill someone?" he asked. The silence that followed gave him the answer. Lily wiped her face with trembling hands. "He killed our mother," she whispered. "And then he—" Her voice broke. Eleanor wrapped her tightly in her arms. Joe looked away, eyes burning. Caleb felt a cold, dark anger settle into his bones. He didn't push for more. The truth was already enough to understand. Hale wasn't a man who wanted justice. He was a predator hunting what he thought belonged to him. "Did he send men after you?" Caleb asked. "3 riders," Eleanor said. "Last time we saw them, they were half a day behind." Joe sneered. "They won't quit. Hale has money, power, men who follow him like dogs." "Then why'd you come this way?" Caleb pressed. "Nothing north of here but barren land. We weren't trying to find a place," Joe said bitterly. "We were trying to lose one." Caleb nodded slowly. "Storm's too rough for anyone to ride through tonight," he said. "But when daylight comes," Eleanor finished the sentence for him, "they'll find us again." Lily squeezed her sister's hands, terrified. "We should go at first light," she whispered, "before he finds this place." Caleb shook his head. You three are half-starved, soaked to your bones, and exhausted. If you leave at dawn, you won't make it far. And if Hale's men find you out in the open, we know, Eleanor said softly. But staying puts you in danger too. Caleb met her eyes steadily. I'll decide what danger I'm willing to face on my own land. The barn went silent. The wind outside screamed like a warning, rattling the roof and making the lantern flicker. Caleb looked at the three sisters, bruised, cold, terrified, and still trying to protect each other. You'll stay here tonight, he said firmly. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. Jo crossed her arms. You don't know what you're inviting, Caleb Turner. He stepped closer, unafraid of her fire. Think you can handle us all? She added, voice sharp, echoing the words she'd thrown at him earlier. Caleb looked at each of them. Eleanor's quiet strength, Jo's fierce defiance, Lily's fragile bravery. I'll handle whatever comes, he said, and whoever comes. The way Jo's expression shifted told him his answer struck deeper than she expected. Before anyone could speak again, the horses suddenly went wild, kicking, snorting, slamming against their stalls. Caleb dropped the tools and rushed forward. What's wrong with them? Lily cried. Lightning cracked again, but Caleb knew this wasn't the storm. Horses didn't panic like this unless they smelled something. Or someone. Caleb's heart pounded as he strode to the barn door, rifle already in hand. Stay back, he warned. He pressed his ear to the wood. For a long moment, there was only the sound of wind. Then through the rain, hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate, approaching. Eleanor grabbed Lily's hand. Jo reached for the small knife hidden in her boot. Caleb's voice dropped low, steady, deadly calm. Girls, someone's out there. The hoofbeats grew clearer with every passing second. Slow, measured. Not the frantic gallop of a rider fighting the storm. No, this was a man who knew exactly where he was going. A man who believed nothing in this world could stop him. Caleb tightened his grip on the rifle. Back away from the door, he murmured. Eleanor pulled Lily behind the tackroom wall. Jo stayed closer, knife clenched tight, jaw set. Fear flickered across her face for only a moment before she buried it beneath anger. The hoofbeats stopped right outside the barn. Caleb could hear the rain hitting leather, the groan of saddle straps, a quiet breath. Too close. Then a man's voice called out through the storm. I know you're in there. Lily gasped softly. Jo's fingers whitened around her knife. The man's voice was deep, polished, smooth. The kind of voice used to giving orders and having them followed. You, Turner? The voice asked. This your land? Caleb didn't answer. Lightning flashed, illuminating a shadow through the cracks in the door. A tall rider on a dark horse. The storm highlighted the silver buckle on his belt, the glint of a shotgun in his hand. Caleb slowly moved to the crack in the barn door. Who's asking? He said quietly. The man laughed. A short, cold sound. You know who I am. Caleb's stomach tightened. Jo's eyes filled with hatred. Lily pressed herself deeper behind Eleanor. The rider tilted his head toward the door, his outline barely visible through the downpour. I know those girls ran this way. The man continued. Storm or no storm, I want them back. Caleb's voice stayed calm. Not sure who you're talking about. A long silence followed, heavy and deadly. Then the man said softly, almost amused, You must think they're worth dying for. Jo stepped forward before Caleb could stop her, voice sharp with rage. You'll die before any of us go with you, Hale. There it was. Richard Hale. The name that had chased them across counties. The name that had stalked their nightmares. The name that owned half the territory and wanted to own them too. The man on the horse chuckled again. Slow, cruel. Ah, Jo. Still sharp-tongued. Your mother had the same fire. It didn't serve her well either. Eleanor's breath hitched in fury. Lily pressed her hands over her ears. Jo lunged for the door, but Caleb caught her waist and yanked her back before she flung herself into the storm. You don't talk about our mother, Jo hissed, trembling with rage. Caleb stepped in front of her, between the sisters and the door. His voice dropped low. Hale, you best ride on. The rain quieted just enough for Hale's mocking voice to carry. Or what? You'll shoot me through your own barn door? You got no idea the trouble you're standing in the middle of, boy. I know enough, Caleb said, and I know the law doesn't reach out here fast enough to save a man like you from a bullet. The silence that followed was sharp as broken glass. Then Hale said, voice ice cold, "This ranch will burn before sunrise, and you'll burn with it." He tugged his reins, but before he could ride off, another voice called out from the darkness. A different set of hoofbeats splashed through the mud. Several, moving fast. Eleanor stiffened. Lily cried out in fear. Joe lifted her knife higher. Caleb aimed his rifle at the door. 3 riders emerged from the storm and pulled up next to Hale. Caleb recognized the look of hired guns instantly. Mean-eyed, soaked armed. Hale shouted above the storm. "Tracks end here. They're inside." "Well then," Hale said, "bring me the door." The men dismounted. Eleanor whispered, terrified. "Caleb." Caleb moved quickly, pushing the sisters toward the back wall. "Stay behind the haystacks, all of you. Don't move until I tell you." Joe grabbed his arm. "Caleb, you can't fight them alone." He looked at her, steady and sure. "I'm not alone." Joe swallowed hard and nodded. Caleb positioned himself behind a heavy beam, just as a boot slammed against the barn door. Wood cracked. Another kick splintered it. On the third, Caleb fired. The blast shattered through the wood, and one of Hale's men screamed, dropping outside. The other 2 dove aside, cursing. "Kill him!" Hale roared. Bullets tore through the barn walls. The sisters ducked as wood chips rained around them. Caleb fired again and again, forcing the men back. The horses inside the barn whinnied in terror. Lily sobbed into Eleanor's shoulder. Joe forced her shaking hands to steady the knife. Outside, Hale shouted to his men. "Set fire to it. Smoke them out." "No," Eleanor cried. Caleb cursed and ran toward the sidewall. But before Hale's men could strike a match, lightning exploded across the sky, revealing 10 riders cresting the hill behind the ranch. Lanterns bouncing, rifles raised, voices shouting. Caleb's heart slammed against his ribs. Neighbors, ranchers, folks who lived miles apart but who knew Caleb Turner as a good man. And they saw the truth of what was happening. One man shouted through the rain, "Turner, we got your back." Hale whipped around in shock. "Shoot them," he yelled. Gunfire erupted. Chaos in the storm. Caleb wrenched open the side door and shouted, "Now run." The sisters bolted behind him into the rain, staying low behind the troughs as bullets lit the night. The ranch exploded into a riot of gunfire, shouting, thunder, and storm wind. Caleb shielded Lily with his own body as they ducked behind a wagon. Eleanor grabbed Joe's arm, dragging her to cover. Neighbors took positions around the ranch, firing back at Hale's men. Hale's voice rose above it all. "You think you can stop me? You think you can hide them?" Then a shot cracked through the storm. A scream followed. Hale's horse reared violently. Hale fell into the mud with a sickening thud, and a rider dismounted nearby, rifle still raised. It was old Ben Cartwell, the nearest rancher. His voice cut through the chaos. "Hale, this land has had enough of you." Hale tried to stand, but his leg buckled. Caleb stalked toward him through the rain, the sisters behind him. Lily trembling, Joe shaking with fury, Eleanor holding them both steady. Hale looked up, soaked, bleeding, desperate, and beaten. Caleb pointed his rifle at him. "You're not touching these women again." Hale spat mud, eyes burning with hate. "You think they need you? You think you can handle all 3? Joe stepped forward, knife still in hand. "We don't need a man to handle us," she said, voice steady as steel. "We needed someone to stand with us." Caleb lowered his rifle just long enough for Joe to finish. "And we choose Caleb Turner." Hale lunged, but before he could reach them, Ben Cartwell struck him across the head with the butt of his rifle. Hale collapsed face first into the mud. The storm raged on, but the danger was over at last. Caleb turned to the sisters, mud on their clothes, tears on their cheeks, relief in their eyes. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Lily shook her head slowly. Eleanor wiped her face and whispered, "We're alive." Joe stepped closer, breathing hard. "You really think you can handle all 3 of us, Caleb Turner?" Caleb finally allowed himself a tired, crooked smile. "I reckon," he said. "I already have." Eleanor laughed. Lily sobbed with relief. Joe sheathed her knife, looking at Caleb with something new in her eyes. Trust. Behind them, the neighbors gathered, checking on injuries, securing the ranch, tying up Hale's surviving men. And as the storm finally broke, the clouds drifting apart to reveal the first pale light of dawn, Caleb realized something. This lonely ranch wasn't empty anymore. His life wasn't empty anymore. Because three sisters with secrets, scars, and courage he'd never seen before had walked into it. And they weren't running anymore. They weren't alone anymore. Do you believe that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open a door for someone running? That standing with someone in their darkest hour makes you stronger than standing alone? This story reminds us that family isn't always blood, courage isn't always loud, and sometimes three desperate women and one quiet cowboy can change each other's lives forever. If this story moved you, subscribe to hear more tales from the Wild West, stories of fugitives who became family, lone cowboys who became protectors, and the moment strangers chose to stand together against impossible odds. Share your thoughts if you've ever been the one running, or the one who opened the door.